huge demonstrations that continued to shake Israel focused their anger on the proposed by the governing coalition justice reform, the reform which is viewed by the demonstrators as an attempted coup. However, the way I see it, the conflict in the Jewish state goes much deeper. On the one hand, there are democratic extremists, as I call them, who demand the abolition of the Jewish state as the Jewish state. And on the other hand, there are those among the Orthodox Jews who deny the very Jewishness of the state of Israel, often referring to it as a Goyish state. Today, our guest is a person who wrote many books concerning the topic, and we hope he'll help us to get some answers as to what exactly do Orthodox Jews in Israel really want as far as the character of the state of Israel goes. Our guest is an expert on religious fundamentalism and is the author of such books as The Jewish Fundamentalism and the Temple Mount, Messianic Religious Zionism Confronts Israeli Territorial Compromises. It was like 10 years ago he wrote it. Jewish Radical Ultra-Orthodoxy Confronts Modernity, Zionism, and Women's Equality, Making of Modern Jewish Identity, and most recently, a very interesting book about a Jewish woman called Ruth Blau. You see the cover of this book behind me. And hopefully we'll touch on it too. But the most important thing I want to talk to Dr. Motti Inbari about the nature of the demands by the super Orthodox Jews in Israel regarding the state of Israel, the nature and the character of the state of Israel. Mordecai, welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, my first question to you is, it's been of great interest to me now for a long time. What do they want, those, not demonstrators, because I understand their position, in many ways, but the Haredi Jews and, what people like Ruth Blau wants, I also think I can understand. But what about the bulk of the Orthodox Jews in Israel want as far as the Jewishness of the state of Israel is concerned? What do they want? They want Iran? What do they want?
Okay. So, first of all, let us distinguish between two major groups of Orthodox Jews. One we call ultra-Orthodox, and also inside that there are divisions and subdivisions. It's very complex. And then the other group is called religious Zionist. This is the Orthodox group that accepts Zionism and integrates Zionism into its point of view. And they are coming from different theological positions, but they all support the judicial reforms and from different reasons. So in order to understand all of that, we need to go backwards, take it 150 years, maybe 140 years earlier, to understand the early disputes between the newly created Zionist movement as it just began its first steps and Orthodoxy. At that point, most of the Jews would be what we refer to today as Orthodox. Of course, the Orthodox is a nuance that came a little bit later, but Orthodoxy, kind of the way we understand Orthodoxy as it today, was starting to shape at that period of time with confrontations with other subgroups that were not keeping Jewish law, like seculars and Reform and others. So during the 2,000 years of exile, of Jewish exile, since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, Jews lost their hope that they can fix their situation by themselves. From the theological point of view, it was understood that God decided to punish the Jewish people for their sins, and therefore he exiled them from their house, from their homes, destroyed the temple, destroyed the monarchy, did all of those things. This came from God as a punishment, and since God punished, only God can fix. And therefore, Jews lived in their exiles in Europe, in North Africa, in Islamic states, and did nothing in order to regroup in their ancient homeland, to rebuild Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple, to do all those things. They said, okay, God will perform it when God will decide it would happen through acts of miracles. So when the Zionist movement started its first steps, so the Orthodox were kind of confused on how to address Zionism. Because from one hand, Zionism was about, about restoring Jewish power. But on the other hand, there were seculars, and Orthodox were opposing seculars. And secondly, they were doing things that were supposed to be done by God. So there was an internal debate among the Orthodox, but very quickly, Orthodoxy stood as one group against Zionism. And so Orthodoxy and Zionism were like developing as two different movements with conflicting and opposing powers. So whereas the Zionist supporters immigrated to Palestine and started building a state, Orthodox decided to stay in Europe. They didn't also want to immigrate to the United States or other options that were available at that time, like South America and so on, because they felt that Jewish life will not be preserved in America. So it's better to stay in Europe. So then came Hitler, and he took all the Orthodox. And so Orthodoxy became a very weak movement after World War II because of the Holocaust, because its center was in Europe, in Poland, in Russia. And this is where all the Jews who went to the concentration camps and to the extermination camps. So Orthodoxy became a very weak movement. Now, so the Orthodox what we refer to as ultra-Orthodox, because there are two groups of Orthodox. One is a Zionist Orthodox and one is a non-Zionist Orthodox. And those who immigrated to Palestine after World War II, Holocaust survivors.
And as I understand, demographically, what we would call ultra-Orthodox, or some would call ultra-Orthodox, actually twice as many as religious Zionists.
Yeah, we can talk about that too today. But this was not the case back then. So they realized that they cannot oppose Zionism. It's unrealistic. Actually, Ruth Blau, that I wrote a book right now, and I wrote a book about her husband, Amram Blau, they opposed Zionism, but this was unrealistic. This was unrealistic.
I'm sorry, Mordechai. I think we need to do a separate conversation about this Ruth Blau, which is very, very interesting book. Thank you very much. And her husband. I do not know if they had sex. Do they have any children?
No, they didn't have any joint children. And it's a big story.
I don't. This is just mind-blowing book. I recommend to everybody. Hopefully, we'll do it again, if you have time. But the thing is that everybody heard about Notare Carta, which is in many minds of people like me, have a place of Jews from hell. I'm sorry, running after Yasser Arafat and making sure that the rulers of Islamic Iran, are satisfied and advocating everywhere that Israel should be destroyed and that Palestinians should become instead of that. I mean, this is amazing. But we'll talk about it later. But let's continue about.
So the Orthodox, when 1948, the State of Israel was established, the ultra-Orthodox was a very small community, a few thousand people. That's what it was in size-wise. Remember, all the big centers of Orthodoxy were destroyed in Europe, and those who came to the State of Israel were just just those who escaped, those who were able to survive the Holocaust. Those are small numbers. And they came to Ben-Gurion and they asked him, to spare them. At that point, there was a war, and everyone was drafted to the military if you were at the age of military service. And then ever since then in Israel, military service is required on every person when they finish high school. And they asked to Ben-Gurion to spare them because there were just 400 people who were sent the conscription letters. 400 people were at the age of draft to the military, and Ben-Gurion decided to come up with this arrangement, which is called his study is his vocation. In Hebrew, it's called Torato Omanuto. The study is vocation, meaning that if you are a genuinely Torah scholar, this is your job, this is your vocation. So the military will spare you, will not need to go to the military, but it is conditioned that this is what you do. You can't do anything else. You just have to study Torah all day long. And so every year, these people had to go to the military and prove that they are Torah students. And this rule applies until they reach the age of 45. Then they are too old for military. They can be exempt, or, and here's the second stipulation, that they have 6 children. So here, the race for the 6 children begins. The moment you can get married, and in Israel it's age of 18, you have to get married, you have to start having children to get to the 6 children as fast as you can. This is the point where you can get exempt from military service. So basically, this arrangement helped create the Haredi, or the ultra-Orthodox subculture, or the group of ultra-Orthodox, and expand their numbers, because it was a survival thing for them. They had to have many children as fast as they can in order to get around conscription to the military. Now, over the years, this group that was small, because they had so many children, started expanding and expanding and expanding. And in 1977, when there was a political change in Israel and the Likud came to power, and ever since then, the Likud is in power more or less all the time, with a few years that Rabin had 3 years and Barak had 1 year. So we're talking about almost 50 years that the Likud is in power, and the Likud basically turned the ultra-Orthodox to be what they call the natural allies. It means that the ultra-Orthodox started receiving much more social securities in order for their support for the Likud governments.
You mean welfare support?
Yes, welfare support.
And free housing, in fact.
It comes on multiple levels: educational, dormitories, institutions, welfare. It comes from a lot of pockets from the Israeli wallet to support this community, and it gave them a lot of power and a lot of opportunities. The numbers kept growing and growing and growing. And here we come to the Supreme Court. At some point, their political power, they let's say, abused their political power in order to demand that ultra-Orthodox will receive more benefits than what all the rest of them are receiving. So the ultra-Orthodox are discriminated, but for the good, not for the bad. And all kinds of legislation was passing through the channels of the Knesset that gave excessive benefits to ultra-Orthodox that no one else receives. And this is where the Supreme Court came and starts striking down this legislation.
Mordechai, do you know that they now are trying to pass the law to put people like you in jail for assaulting, because you are an anti-Semite as far as criticism of ultra-Orthodox Jews is concerned. I do not know. That law is going to affect only Haredi Jews, or is going to cover also criticism of any Orthodox Jew?
Yeah, let's see how what law passes, if it passes. Sometimes these are just, declarations that eventually do not materialize to any type of legislation. But the Supreme Court started noticing that the situation in Israel is not equal, and ultra-Orthodox receive benefits that others do not receive. And the Supreme Court became, the worry of ultra-Orthodox politicians. They are afraid that the Supreme Court will strike down their extra benefits. And this is why they want to control and to have power over the Supreme Court. So this explains the motivations of the ultra-Orthodox. Now we go back 150 years earlier, 100 years earlier, to understand how religious Zionism came to be and where do they stand. So, as I said, these two groups, ultra-Orthodox from one hand and secular Zionists on the other hand, were starting to develop separately and in hostility and in friction between one another. But there were Orthodox Jews, some Orthodox Jews, not a lot, but some that decided that there has to be a way to reconcile the two. There has to be a way that you can be Orthodox and Zionist at the same time. And so since ultra-Orthodox kind of said that it's all about the Messiah, the Messiah should do what the Zionist movement is doing, and therefore Zionism is false messianism. Those Orthodox Jews who wanted to join the Zionists frame it also in the language of Messiah. And the champion of this ideology was Rabbi Avraham Yitzhak Kook. He was a Lithuanian rabbi who was born in the 19th century, and he came up with this understanding that the Zionist movement represents a messianic process that is being conducted by human agents. So, and he found in rabbinical literature the explanation to support his argument. Basically, it's supported mostly by Maimonides' books about the end of days. And basically, he said this is a process. A process begins through human agency. Human beings are taking action. And then this process will move from one step to another, from another step to another step. Eventually, it will reach the final stages of this process. This is where God will intervene. This is where God will perform miracles. This is where God will send the Messiah from the skies. So it starts through a human process. It ends with God's powers. And therefore, they came up with this formula, which called the Zionist movement, later the State of Israel, is the first steps toward the Jewish redemption. Reshit Smichat Geulatenu. This is how it's called in Hebrew. And so this created this movement within Zionism that was Orthodox and Zionist. They framed it through the language of Messianism. 1967 came, the big victory, the Israeli victory, that took Judea, Samaria, the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, and, very importantly, Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So from the perspective of religious Zionists, this was the moment in which God sent a message to the Jews that this process moved from the first step to the second step. The process is advancing. And this created the mindset that would eventually create the Gush Emunim and the settlement movement. So basically, the settlement movement was created.
This is also the time and the point when the so-called progressive Israelis got very, very disappointed, like Amos Oz and others, and turned against these people. So the break has happened already in 1967.
It's in the 1970s. It happens. It takes a little bit. What brings it forward is the 1973, the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War kind of was a big blow for all Israelis. No one was expecting such a blow. And there was a lesson for both groups of the Israeli map from the Yom Kippur War. Let's say the secular Israelis, like Amos Oz that you mentioned, they concluded from that war that Israel needs to move forward with peace. It's better to have peace than to have, war. And That's the secular understanding. But the religious Zionist understanding was just the opposite. After the war, after the 73 war, Henry Kissinger started this process that was intended for Israel to give back all the territories that it took in 67 in return for peace. So this became the formula of land for peace. This is Kissinger's formula, land for peace. And the religious Zionists said, oh my gosh, we are going to give back, we are going to return all these territories to the Arabs, and therefore God gave us a victory in 67 and we're going to give it back. So we don't, and this is why this started the settlements. The settlements came in order to stop Kissinger. In 1974, in order to stop Kissinger, the first settlement, Sebastia, it was in order to stop Kissinger from advancing the land for peace idea. And the idea, the logic behind it is to participate in God's plan, to build settlements, and to claim this territory belongs to us. In 1967, so only 2 years later, the Likud took power, and the Likud was aligned with this mindset that we need to build settlement, and started expanding the settlements more and more and more. Today, we are about 500,000 Jews living in those settlements. So, but over the years, land for peace keeps coming back. So, from one hand, Begin signed expanded territories, but from the other hand, he signed peace agreement with Egypt, which included land for peace, return of all Sinai Peninsula, including uprooting all the settlements that were built in the Sinai Desert. And then came the Oslo Accords in 1993, in which the establishment of the Palestinian territory and again the logic of land for peace. And in 1993 and the Oslo Accord, the logic was that eventually Israel would find with the Palestinians some kind of a solution over the Temple Mount. This is very critical to understand. According to Jewish tradition and Jewish beliefs, at the end of the Messianic process, when God will decide, a temple will be built on the Temple Mount. So this is the peak of the Messianic process. A temple built on the Temple Mount and restoring the Jewish institutions as they used to be 2,000 years ago. There will be a kingdom, there will be a temple, there will be all those things. Now, if the state of Israel is giving back territories and is willing to give back and negotiate the Temple Mount, it means that the entire belief that the state of Israel represents a messianic process that eventually would lead to that end, the state of Israel eventually will build a temple for God in the Temple Mount. This is how they understood things. So if the state of Israel is signing those peace agreements, it means that everything was a mistake. And this is something which is very hard for people to accept. And we have to understand it. Religious Zionists were very much against the Oslo Accords because it was a danger to their beliefs that the state of Israel represents a portion of the messianic end.
Mordechai, but right now we're just covering some differences in policies. My main question is, what exactly do Orthodox Jews want the state of Israel to be? What is the nature of the state? I mean, right now, they on the surface of it, they say Torah should be the constitution of Israel. I mean, this is what I want us to focus, because I don't understand where in halacha or where in the Jewish literature, including Torah, they can draw on other than proclaiming, a kingdom, a king, to be a new David and things like this. So what do they want?
So let me finish the sentence. Okay. So about the Supreme Court, religious Zionists want to control the Supreme Court because they realized that it was the only barrier that if everyone is against them, and if the state decides to relinquish territories for peace in the future, the only place that they will be able to stop it would be in the Supreme Court. And this is why they want to control it. So the ultra-Orthodox want to control the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is starting to notice that the situation in Israel is unfair, And the religious Zionists want to control the Supreme Court because they want to have a safeguard for land in case.
Do they want the Supreme Court judges to be rabbis?
They want to control the court in a way that the court will never allow the state to execute a plan to relinquish territories. That the court will make it unconstitutional. This is why, because if they think that they will have the right judges, this is what they would rule. Okay, so this regarding this. So coming to your question, so these two groups have a different mindset. Ultra-Orthodox would want the state to be a state that's controlled by religious laws. I think through the similar model to Iran. I think it would be a similar model at the end of the day. But they acknowledge that the state of Israel today is just a temporary situation. You know, it's not the final Jewish government as in the Bible times. You know, King David and the state of Israel is not the same thing. I think that ultra-Orthodoxy, in its mentality, it doesn't see itself as the lords of the land. You know, they see themselves as a minority that is living under, under siege. They are living in these communities that are strictly ultra-Orthodox.
The whole halakha developed over the last 2,000 years just to govern the acts of an individual person within a community.
Exactly. So you're touching a very good point that with the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago, there was no Jewish state. So the halakha, the Jewish law that was developed over the years, was about the Jewish community. It's a separate community that's living among the Gentiles. So how to govern a community, not how to govern a state. And again, a state in 2023 is very different than the 1600 or 1500 the Jewish communities in the Middle Ages. It's a different thing. So they realize and they understand that the halakha doesn't give the tools. So they would want to have control over their own community. They would want to expand the public appearance of the state to be as much what they refer to as Jewish as possible. But they don't have the aspiration to rule the state. They don't have the aspiration.
But many of them do. Many Orthodox Jews in Israel do. Like Rackover, was advocating, this. I mean, it's been going on now from 1980. There was this process where the laws of Israel have to take into consideration Torah and things like this, which on the surface of it, at least for a person like me, quite reasonable. But my question is this. Within all those Orthodox communities, the nature of power is, I'm sorry, I would have to say it, idolatry. I mean, it's unelected leadership, passed over from one generation to another, with somebody being smarter than others, with somebody, trying to claim to be smart, with some others actually being smart. I do not know. And everybody, just observes what community has as its main guidelines. This does not work for a state of Israel if it wants to be democratic. I mean, you mentioned that probably they want another Iran, a Jewish Iran. I have to say, I'm absolutely against Iran or Jewish Iran or whatever it is. Although, having said it, I'm going to accept Jewish Iran if there's no other choice to a Jewish state. But I do not want Iran in the land of Israel.
Yeah, and they don't have the majority for that. So they don't, it's unrealistic. What they are trying to do is to make some laws that will benefit their own community. They don't think about the majority. They don't think about everyone. They think about their own community. They all think about how they can take more money for themselves, how can they build for themselves. It's just they don't have like a nationwide
a vision of a new state, of Jewish state.
Exactly. They are just thinking about their own community and how can they, support their own little community and expand it. So they don't have this
But in this
vision.
way, they can destroy the state of Israel. I mean, look at this. They're paying 2% of the taxes, and they're getting 14% of all the income from the government treasury.
So again, I'm not trying to defend them. I'm just saying, they are just concentrating about how to make their own community better with more money and more funds and more control and on all kinds of things that relates to their own little community. They don't have a greater vision, but religious Zionists do. Religious Zionists do have a vision, and the vision that they have is a messianic vision.
Tell us more about it. I mean, tell us more, and please focus on what exactly they want the state of Israel to be like, how the government is going to be elected, selected, or whatever it is, and what are going to be the main laws. I mean, what do they want? They, like, for example, Smotrich was talking about, Torah being the guide for Ministry of Economics or Justice or whatever it is. How does it work?
Okay. So regarding that comment that Smotrich has made, he's borrowing very interestingly. Basically, this is the Americanization of Israel. Basically, in America, there is this Christian movement called Pentecostals. And Pentecostals believe in what they refer to as prosperity theology. It means that if you're doing things right according to God, God will reward you by putting money in your pocket. So, yeah. So they say it like that, you do something good, God will give you money for that. And this is what Smotrich basically have said, if we follow God's laws, we will have economical prosperity.
Providing he knows the meaning of the sentence, if we follow God. I mean, I do not know what he means, Does he know what he means?
He has certainty about this way of life and that this is the way God wants. So Smotrich and Ben-Gvir to some extent, though Ben-Gvir is not really a visionary person, but the circle that he's coming from, their vision is messianic. Basically, what they want to do is to restore the Davidian kingdom.
So they want monarchy.
Yes, they want monarchy, and they want to restore the temple.
And who is the offspring of that monarch of King David?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer this question, but their mindset is that the state of Israel should look as much as possible to a halachic state. And
King David did not follow halacha at that time.
Yeah.
In fact, you can make a really good point that according to modern halacha, he was not a Jew at all.
Yes, the rabbis did not convert his grandmother correctly, and so they didn't issue a certificate for his grandmother. So therefore, I think that you have a point here.
There was no conversion according to modern halacha. There was nothing. The great-grandmother was not Jewish from prohibited tribe, anan.
Yeah, by the way, her name was Ruth. And
that's right. I mean, but look at this. I have to say this. I consider Ruth Moabite, to be a Jewish woman as she joined our tribe. And I consider this Ruth Blau to be a completely Jewish woman, So,
So let's go back to our conversation, which is about the vision of the Messiah. So if you probably have noticed, and your listeners have been noticing as well, that there is an uptick in excitement and visits to the Temple Mount. And this is something that has to taken into account that 10 years ago, no religious Zionist, almost no one went to the Temple Mount. And now they are coming in their tens of thousands. Even politicians are starting to bring up laws in order to take from the Muslims the Dome of the Rock and turn it into a synagogue. And this is a law that is just being proposed by a Likud member of all people. And there is something that is happening around the Temple Mount. And what is happening around the mount is...
Try this simple ice hack with water before bed. Every human has around 100...
Something. Yeah, please continue. So I'll cut it out. You know, something happened.
Yeah, something is happening around the Temple Mount. And this is the excitement that they want to move forward the Messianic process on the Temple Mount. And this is a major change to the way in which they were used to think about the Temple Mount. In the past, what they used to think was that through the settlements, they will move the Messianic process forward, and eventually the Temple Mount will be something at the end of the process. This is Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, the son of Rabbi Kook, the elder. The son said the Temple Mount has to be left to the end of the process. We shouldn't do anything at all with the Temple Mount. But now, those who say that they are following the Kook family rabbis, they are entering the Temple Mount in large numbers, and they are trying to change the status quo on the Temple Mount and to make it a Jewish synagogue, and start the real action that would move forward the construction of a temple on the Temple Mount. And this is their vision. This is what they want to do. They want to have redemption, and they think that they need to do it by their own
action. So they want
action.
to use the secular state in order to bring about restoration of the third temple.
Yeah, the secular state for them is just a step toward what it's supposed to be. You know, you have to do it through steps. The secular state is the first step. The secular step has to become religious, and eventually everything will flip, and then they can, finish the redemption and finish the process, and they can't wait anymore. So they have to start building a temple right now, and have to start the process of concentrating on the Temple Mount.
Very interesting. And the fact that such thing can actually destroy the state of Israel, does it bother them?
I think that they are waiting, and they are looking forward to this fight. They believe that they can make a leap toward this end through a war. And this is what I'm starting to think, that this is why they are doing those things. They want to create provocations in order to lead it to a war, to escalate it to a war.
Let's say there's going to be a war. Let's say that all Palestinians are going to be driven from those territories. All Arabs are going to be driven. There's going to be only Jews in the land of Israel. My question is this: given their attitude toward other Jews that do not belong to their communities, what do they think they're going to get?
This is you're asking a rational question to a non-rational, audience. They believe that God will help them. So God will solve the problem.
God always helped us, even when we were in Auschwitz. The issue is how you think about God's help and what you consider to be God's help. I mean, you can say, 6 million were killed, but God saved another, 9 million. So
the way they answer this question would be, God killed the 6 million, but he established the state of Israel 3 years later. So this was part of God's plan, and they can explain it through that. So they say God had to destroy the Jewish communities in Europe in order to build the state of Israel. So this was part of the plan.
People like that see always, that has occurred as part of their understanding of reality. But when you ask them to see a little bit ahead of themselves, they always fail.
Yes, I've been having this conversation right now. Actually, yesterday I had this conversation with a friend of mine on Facebook that is for the temple. And he doesn't give any, logical explanation, but he wants war, and I understand the logic.
I'm sorry, I'm also for the temple. I have to say this. I believe in God. God brought us back to the land of Israel, and he gave us back home, which is Israel, a very important home. I mean, look at this. We're now in the United States. If there wouldn't be Israel, our position in the United States would be quite different.
Okay, but you say you're for the temple, but you have to understand that in the world that we are living today, if Israel will make a change, if Israel will touch the mosque on the Temple Mount, if Israel will take the Dome of the Rock from the Muslims and turn it into a synagogue, if Israel will do any of those things, or will destroy it, or will do something to them, there would be a war.
I'm sure there's going to be a war. I mean, I do not want a war, but if there's going to be war, there's going to be war. Because, but my question is this: the Temple Mount. So we're going to be going back to the way it was under Greeks, and there's going to be a temple, and there's going to be what? We're going to be slaughtering some sheep and other animals.
Yes.
Rivers of blood is going to be falling, on Western Wall. The Western Wall is no longer needed. And there's going to be Kohanim, our priests.
They are preparing for that. They're already doing those things. They are building the vessels. They are learning how to do this.
But the priests in the Second Temple were subservient to foreigners.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah. These are the Sadducees. Yeah, the Sadducees.
Not only Sadducees. I'm talking about the Syrian Greeks, that were controlling it. And the Second Temple was established by King Cyrus, and controlled by Persians, So now, what does it mean that Israel I mean, you can say that Israel today is controlled by the United States, and every country in the world, every major country in the world wants to have a piece of Jerusalem. Everybody wants Jerusalem. I mean, that's one of the things that happened in human history. But for me, as a Jew, I want a stable, solid Jewish state where, if needs to be, I can find asylum.
Yes, but I can tell you that if Israel will do anything at all, if Israel will touch the mosques on the Temple Mount, you can say goodbye to all of the Abrahamic Accords, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan. They will all go to war. There will be thousands of dead. There will be a lot of destruction. There's no guarantee that Israel would win. You have to think also in logical terms. Israel never wanted to provoke the entire Muslim world. They never wanted to provoke it.
But I have to say, if we're going to be afraid to do something like this, if we're going to be afraid of war, we're going to get war. That's the rule throughout human history. If you're afraid of war, you're going to get it.
But is it wise to provoke? Is it wise to provoke 1 billion Muslims?
I would have to say to provoke, it maybe is the word, but on the other hand, look at this. Sharon removed Jews, 3 generations of Jews from Gaza. What is the result? The result is Gaza is turned into a staging ground for attacks against Israel. The same is happening in Lebanon. And the news is shrinking. It's tightening around Israel. The war is going to be there no matter what. And it's not because of provocation on Temple Mount. I mean, the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs and their supporters throughout Arab and Muslim world want it.
Israel, since Israel took the Temple Mount in 1967, the policy and the logic and everything was to leave the Temple Mount for the Muslims. They created the status quo arrangements in which the Muslims have full control over the platform.
You mean Jordan?
Yeah, it gave it to the Waqf. The Waqf is in control of Jordan. Mm-hmm. So the Waqf so the Mount is an exclusive worship site for Muslims. The Kotel, the wall, is an exclusive worship site for Jews, and Jews cannot pray on the platform on the Mount, and Muslims cannot pray at the Kotel. These are 2 exclusive worship sites that should not blend, and this policy has worked. We are now 50 years after that war. Israel was able to unpack the tension that relates to the Islamic sites, also because the rabbi said so. The rabbi said that when God will choose to make redemption, God will make it happen. God will bring from the heavens a temple ready-made. So this is the rabbis of medieval times. They think that in heaven there is a temple, and when God will decide to descend it to the ground, this is what would happen. So they're waiting for God to do that. And in the meanwhile,
we're talking about Temple Mount, whatever, so we have some different thoughts about it. But let's talk about a different aspect of my question, and that is the Orthodox, be it religious Orthodox or already, they want increased influence within a state of Israel. And in fact, many of them want the Israel to be governed by halacha, by Jewish laws.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, the ultra-Orthodox, their main concern is their own community. They
don't care about other Israelis.
It's not live and let live. Of course, they don't live and let live. So they of course they don't
so they cannot even conceptualize then the state of Israel.
But they don't have the mindset that they are the lords of the land. Their mindset is that they need to support their own community through robbing the treasury of the state of Israel. And this is how they play. This is their playbook. They do it all the time. So what happens in Tel Aviv is less of their concern. They're more concerned about Bnei Brak, not about Tel Aviv. As I said, religious Zionists think differently about it.
So what are you saying, that this idea of using the laws of Torah in governing of the whole Israel is what, baseless? Is of no use? What?
It's more rhetorical. They don't try to do it in any ways. They don't. No, they don't try. On the contrary, if you look at Israel through the years, now in Tel Aviv, there are buses running also on Shabbat. So they're not trying to block this. They're not trying to say, stop the buses.
In Jerusalem, they do.
It was always an uphill battle to open things on Shabbat, restaurants, cinema theaters. Eventually it happened. And their concentration is mostly on their own communities. They cannot fight all the fights in Israel. It's more rhetorical than real action. As you look at Israel is becoming, more open on Shabbat and on Passover. More and more places are offering, bread on Passover. And the Orthodox, it's just rhetorical. They are screaming and yelling, but it just the power is that it's developing more and more to be secular rather than to be Orthodox.
So, but look at this right now. With their help, a government is in power. So they're using, democratic structure of Israel in order to influence Israel. I mean, yes, they are first of all concerned about their own needs, which I understand. I'm concerned, first of all, about my own needs, as you are of your own needs. But they use the structure of the state. Now, but let's say that there's going to be a monarch, a king of Israel, somehow, I do not know. What would be the relationship between these Haredi communities and this king? What, he's not going to tell them, let's go fight when the war is there?
So it's hypothetical. No, there is no king. So we don't know what will be the relationship.
By the way, of three conditions for not taking a person into the army during the war, study of Torah is not one of them.
Okay, what are the three conditions?
One is if you have a child born, then for a little while, or you plant a garden, a vineyard. And third one, if you're afraid. Now, if they declare that they're afraid to fight, not study Torah, but afraid to fight, then they can be exempt.
Okay, so this is the law of halacha, but
it's the law of Torah.
Yeah, but the Israeli laws they define it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And you say this is an example that the Israel is not an halacha state.
Right.
Yeah.
And also in Israel, thank God, so far you can say whatever you want without, there's some things without going to jail.
Yeah. Look, the Ten Commandments have idolatry. It's one of the Ten Commandments. This is not part of the law of Israel. You know, you can be idolatrous. There's no penalty. No one will put you in prison if you are an idolatress.
Yeah, so they want what? They want Torah to be the constitution of the state of Israel?
Yeah, they want, but this is a matter of declarations. It's not a matter of action.
Okay. Well, Mordechai, I hope that you were going to tell us that they know what they want, you know, that they have a vision for a state of Israel. And the only thing, from what I understood from our conversation, is that they have really nothing other than the self-interest to perpetuate the way of life the way they do it now. And I have to say, they have, as far as I'm concerned, they have absolute right, as long as they do not do it at taxpayers' expense. If they come to me personally and ask for money, I'll give some to the extent that I can. They have the right to use it whatever way they want, but not.
They are using the tools that democracy gives them. And as long as they're using these tools, it's a fair game, you know. Democracy allows them to use their political power.
But do they have their own state, according to what I understand from you, division of their own Jewish state? They don't.
They don't have a Jewish state.
So they call it Goyish state, non-Jewish state, but this is just a hypocrisy on their part.
Yeah, so the Jewish community has always lived, you know, in Russia, in Poland, and they always had to deal with the monarch, the Tsar.
But that was non-Jewish. Now they call what? They call Netanyahu a Goy?
So you just said a Goy, if they call it a Goyish state, they have the same mindset, you know. We always had to deal with the monarch. It's not ours. We are just a minority inside it.
Yeah, if I'd be God, I would not visit people like that.
Okay, you can like it, you can dislike it, but this is how they think about things.
In any case, hopefully, I just hope that there's going to be peace in that part of the world, and that people will be able to argue and even go on demonstrations without burning things like they do in France.
Yeah. The demonstrations in Israel are peaceful, and an example of, you know, how a disagreement is being conducted in a peaceful way so far. Yeah.
Before we finish our conversation, I want you to tell us a little bit about your new book, because I did not read the whole thing, but chapters, a few that I read, sounds extremely, extremely interesting. Please tell us about this Ruth Blau and your new book. It came out last month, right?
Yeah, just a few weeks ago. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, so this is a biography of a woman that has done some tremendous things and have gone through corners and places in Israel's history, European history, that are just extraordinary. And she's not so known, especially not for English-speaking audience, but it's definitely an opportunity for you to learn about her. And I'll just say briefly how the story. She was born a Catholic in France in 1920. When World War II broke, she was 18 years old, and she moved to southern France. She joins the resistance. She became a double agent. She joined the Nazi headquarters, the Gestapo, and was gaining their trust, reporting to the resistance about what was going on during the headquarters of the Nazis.
Brave woman.
Yes, yes. And she had a little child. She took a lot of risks. And after the war, she joined the French Secret Service, and she went on a secret mission in Morocco.
By the way, she had a little child. Was she married?
The hit a little child comes later, but yeah. And after that episode in the 1950s, she started an educational journey and a spiritual journey. Eventually, she was studying to a PhD degree in philosophy, and she converted to Judaism. First, she converted through a Reform conversion, and then later she wanted to marry an Orthodox rabbi, so she went through an Orthodox conversion, and And eventually she ended up with the ultra-Orthodox. She came to the ultra-Orthodox community.
Meaning she was not satisfied with Reform?
No.
Not Orthodox? She wanted to be a real Jew.
Exactly. So she went through this phase exactly in France. She started Reform, then she went to modern Orthodox, then she went to ultra-Orthodox. Eventually she decided to move to Israel. And one of the rabbis who converted her in France recruited her to help them conceal Yossele Schumacher. The Yossele Schumacher case is a very tragic story. Not so tragic, because no one was harmed, but there was a family of Hasidics that the daughter had a little son, and she became, let's say, modern Orthodox, not Hasidic, but modern Orthodox. And she enlisted her son to a modern Orthodox school, so the grandfather kidnapped the grandson so that he won't go to a modern Orthodox school. And they were trying to hide that boy from the police. And this is where they recruited Ruth Ben David at that time, and asked her to smuggle the boy outside of Israel.
Why Ben David? Why not Ben Abel?
So when she converted, her name was Madeleine Lucette Ferrey. So when she converted, she took a Jewish name. She called herself Ruth because of the convert, Ruth, the famous Ruth.
Yeah.
Ben David, it means the son of King David, because Ruth was the grandmother of David. So this is why she came up with this name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not Bat David, but Ben David.
Yeah, because this is a typical Ben David is the typical name. And okay, so going back to Yossele, he had a secret, she was a spy. She knew how to do the stuff. So she forged her documents, she forged his documents, she disguised him as a girl. They grew his hair, they make it blonde, and she smuggled him outside of Israel. For almost 3 years, the boy was in ultra-Orthodox schools in Switzerland, in France. Eventually, he ended up in Brooklyn, New York, with a community that is kind of close to the Satmars, not Satmar, but close to Satmar. And at some point, Ben Gurion, who was the prime minister at that point, called the Mossad and asked them to try to find the boy. So Isser Harel, the head of the Mossad, was able to connect the dots to see the abduction of that boy connected with this woman. So he sent his agents, and they eventually trapped her in France. They kidnapped her, and after 14 days of interrogations, she gave the location of the boy for immunity. So the Mossad called the FBI, and the FBI found the boy in New York, hiding with the family, and brought him back to his parents. This is the end of the Yossele story. Now, she came back to Israel, and then the big rabbi of Jerusalem, Amram Bloy, wanted to marry her because he just became widowed, and he proposed to her, and she agreed. And then the entire ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem were outraged. How come
was this guy a founder of Neturei Karta?
Yes, the founder of Neturei Karta, and the big famous rabbi wanted to marry the convert. How come a great rabbi like this would marry a convert? So there was a big scandal. It took 2 years to solve this problem. Eventually, married.
So he was not a Cohen, right?
He was not a Cohen, but the community just opposed this marriage. They just opposed it, and it took them 2 years to solve the problem with the Satmar Rebbe and I found a lot of documents about these letters that she wrote. It really was a very painful story for her. After her husband died, he died in 1973. From 1974 forward, she's using her Belgian passport, the French passport, to travel to Arab lands and to try to help Jews in distress. And I found some very interesting documents that tell a very interesting story. So apparently she met Yasser Arafat multiple times, his deputy Abu Jihad. But the most famous and the strongest connection she has made had been in Iran. She met Ayatollah Khomeini twice, and her name is connected to some big things that were happening in Iran at that
What was the common ground that she established between them?
So, yes. So my assumption is that she was recruited by the Mossad the Mossad was unable to directly speak with Khomeini because Khomeini, because of the situation. So they used emissaries to go to him. And there were two things that were that Mossad had wanted to understand. So one thing would be, what would be the fate of Iranian Jews once the revolution takes place in Iran? And Khomeini gave a promise to her that she forwarded to Menachem Begin, and they spoke over the phone, that he will not harm Iranian Jews after the revolution. So put it in the context what has happened back then. So after the revolution took place, the Iranian students stormed the American embassy and took 400 American diplomats as hostages. They were hostages for about a year until they were released. At the same time, Iraq invaded Iran. And the situation was complicated, and especially for Israel. Israel wanted Iran to be able to fight Iraq, because at that time, Iraq was viewed as a much stronger threat than Iran. And because of the situation with the hostages, the United States put a block on all the Iranian money, and Iran was unable to sell oil. And because of all these sanctions that were posted on Iran at that time, because of the situation, Iran was unable to buy weapons to fight the war with Iraq. So the Mossad came up with a plan that later on was called the Iran-Contra scandal, in which the United States sold weapons to guerrilla fighters in South America, and those guerrilla fighters took these containers of weapons and forwarded them to Iran through Israel.
So she was a part of Iran-Contra deal?
Yes, she was the originator of that deal.
Wow!
Yes.
Wow! Wow! Amazing.
Yes, this is an amazing story.
Well, I'm going out and I'm going to buy this book, and I thank you, for spending a lot of time, producing it. In any case, Mordechai, thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. Although on the first part we did not get, maybe there's no place to get to. Maybe it's just the nature of what is taking place is beyond comprehension. But I don't understand. I don't understand how the people going back to Israel, having come back to Israel, and having Torah supposedly as their guide, have no idea of what the state of Israel should be, other than just some incomprehensible fantasies.
Oh, we could talk about it maybe in the future again if you invite me to your
by
Jewish
comparison,
cafe.
it seems to me like by comparison to their fantasies, the ideas that were guiding Ben Gurion were great ideas, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I do not know, although he loved Lenin, he traveled to meet Lenin personally and things like this. So I'm not saying, that everything with Ben Gurion was okay, but I like him, I like him. But these particular people, I don't understand. And on many points, I disagree with them profoundly. First of all, the fact that they want to redefine the Jewish people in such a way that to limit the access to the land of Israel, to the state of Israel, by millions. And also the fact that they want war but do not want to fight that war. That bothers me.
Yeah.
And if you want war, you should be ready to fight it. Now, I understand that the religious Zionists are ready to fight, but they use, there's only, 6 or 7% of them, and there's 14% of Haredi, so they need their help, but Haredi pushing them, but then do not want to sacrifice. So I do not know. I mean, I used to, in any case, that's not important.
Okay.
Mordechai, nice talking to you.
Thank you
very much for your time and your very interesting information. And I'm gonna buy this book, Ruth Blau, and the only thing is, as you were talking, the thought came to my mind. My God, that's another Martara case, where Pope was defending, the boy stolen from a Jewish family by their Catholic servant. And here, this Ruth Blau took part in similar case.
Yeah.
And not very nice, but who knows, as they say, the ways of God, unfathomable, unfathomable.
Yes, absolutely.
In
All
any
right.
case, have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
You too.
Zeitgesund and the very
Zeitgesund.
best. I'll talk.
Thank you.
Bye.